Bitter Wyoming winds howled like a wounded animal, burying the desolate train platform in blinding white, clutching a stolen marriage contract to her pounding heart. She stepped into the blizzard. From the swirling snow, a towering shadow emerged, tipping his frost-covered Stetson. A cowboy softly drawled. "I've been waiting out here. Bitter Creek, Wyoming." In the winter of 1887 was not a place for the faint of heart, nor was it a place for a woman running from a ghost of her own making. The Union Pacific locomotive let out a final, agonizing hiss of steam, the sound immediately swallowed by the roaring blizzard that had besieged the territory for 3 days. Clara Montgomery stood on the icy planks of the station platform, her thin woolen coat offering entirely too little protection against the biting cold. In her trembling hands, she clutched a worn leather satchel that did not belong to her. Inside, it rested a collection of beautifully penned letters, a one-way train ticket, and a marriage contract bearing the name Abigail Preston. But Abigail Preston was currently halfway to California with a silver prospector she had met in Omaha. Clara, who had been hired as Abigail's destitute traveling companion, had made a split-second, desperate decision when she found Abigail's empty hotel room and the discarded satchel, facing a return to the grueling, soot-stained factories of Philadelphia and the crushing debts left by her late father. Clara had pinned the bride's cameo brooch to her own collar and boarded the westbound train. She was no longer Clara Montgomery, a penniless maid. She was Abigail, a mail-order bride promised to a Wyoming rancher. As the train pulled away, leaving her isolated in the blinding whiteout, terror began to eclipse the cold. The town of Bitter Creek seemed non-existent. There were only vague outlines of timber buildings buried under snowdrifts. Then, a figure stepped out from the lee of the station house. He was a mountain of a man, clad in a heavy canvas duster and leather chaps, a thick wool scarf pulled up over his jaw. Snow clung to his broad shoulders and the brim of his dark Stetson. As he approached, the wind seemed to break around him. He stopped just a few feet away, pulling the scarf down to reveal a strong, weathered face, a jawline rough with dark stubble, and eyes the piercing, pale blue of a winter sky. He looked at her, taking in her shivering frame, her pale face, and the terrified grip she had on the satchel. He didn't ask for her name. He didn't ask about the delay. He simply tipped his hat, the gesture slow and deliberate. "I've been waiting out here," he softly drawled, his voice a deep, resonant rumble that carried over the howling wind. "You must be Abigail." Clara swallowed the lump of panic in her throat. "Yes," she whispered, the lie burning her lips. "I am. And you? You are Jeremiah Caldwell." "I am." He didn't offer a wide smile or a romantic embrace as the letters had promised. He simply reached out and took the heavy satchel from her freezing hands. "We need to ride out before the pass closes completely. My buckboard is right over here. Step where I step, Mom. The drifts are deep." The journey to the Caldwell Ranch was a grueling test of endurance. Jeremiah had wrapped Clara in a massive, heavy buffalo robe, seating her on the wooden bench of the wagon while he drove the team of thick-coated draft horses. The snow fell so thick and fast that Clara couldn't see past the horses' ears. For 2 hours, they rode in near silence, the only sounds the rhythmic, heavy breathing of the animals, the crunch of snow under the iron-rimmed wheels, and the relentless screaming of the Wyoming wind. Clara huddled beneath the heavy fur, stealing glances at the man beside her. In the letters, Jeremiah had been a poet. He had written of the golden sunsets over the Bighorn Mountains, of the wildflowers that blanketed the plains in spring, and of the profound, quiet loneliness of a man who just wanted a partner to share the beauty of the frontier. But the man driving the wagon seemed carved from granite, silent, stoic, and entirely focused on survival. Had she made a terrible mistake? "Are you warm enough?" he asked suddenly, not turning his head, his eyes fixed on the treacherous, invisible trail. "I am managing, Mr. Caldwell," Clara replied, her teeth chattering despite the heavy robe. "Jeremiah," he corrected gently. "If we're to be married by the end of the week, you'd best get used to calling me Jeremiah." They arrived at the ranch just as the pale, grey light of afternoon began to surrender to the pitch black of a winter night. The sprawling estate she had envisioned from the letters was nowhere to be seen. Instead, the Caldwell spread consisted of a sturdy, rough-hewn log cabin, a massive timber barn, and a few outbuildings, all huddled together against the vast, unforgiving landscape. Jeremiah lifted her from the wagon, his hand strong and secure around her waist, and practically carried her through the knee-deep snow to the cabin's front porch. He kicked the door open, ushering her inside. The interior was warm, smelling of cedar wood smoke, roasted coffee, and old leather. A fire blazed in the large stone hearth. But the true surprise was sitting on a braided rug near the fire, playing with a set of carved wooden blocks. It was a little girl, no older than 6, with unruly dark curls and large, solemn brown eyes. She looked up as the door closed, staring at Clara with intense curiosity. Jeremiah shook the snow from his duster and hung his hat on a peg. He walked over to the little girl, resting a large, calloused hand gently on her head. "Abigail," Jeremiah said softly, looking back at Clara with a vulnerability that suddenly matched the tone of his letters. "I didn't mention her in the correspondence. I was afraid you wouldn't come if you knew. This is my daughter, Lily." Clara stood frozen by the door, the stolen cameo feeling like a heavy stone against her throat. Another twist in a twisted tale. She wasn't just here to be a wife to a stranger. She was here to be a mother to a motherless child. And she was doing it all under a stolen name. The blizzard raged for 3 unbroken days, trapping them inside the sturdy log cabin. The isolation forced an intense, immediate domesticity upon the 3 of them. Clara, desperate to prove her worth and alleviate the crushing guilt of her deception, threw herself into the role of the capable frontier woman. She quickly learned her way around the massive cast-iron stove. Despite having been a lady's maid in Philadelphia, Clara had grown up the daughter of a hard-working baker before his gambling debts ruined them. Her hands knew how to knead dough, how to coax a fire to life, and how to stretch meager rations. On her second morning, she awoke before dawn, quietly slipping out of the small alcove bed Jeremiah had given up for her. She found the kitchen, ground the roasted coffee beans, and set a pan of thick-cut bacon to sizzle. By the time Jeremiah emerged from the main room, where he had slept on a narrow cot, the cabin was filled with the rich, comforting aromas of breakfast. He stopped in the doorway, pausing as he buttoned his flannel shirt. He watched Clara as she expertly flipped a skillet of cornmeal flapjacks. For a moment, Clara caught his gaze. The harsh, stoic lines of his face had softened entirely. "You didn't have to do all this," Jeremiah said, his voice husky from sleep. "A ranch requires early risers, does it not?" Clara smiled, though her heart hammered against her ribs. She was terrified of making a mistake, of revealing her refined Eastern city accent. or showing that she didn't know the first thing about the aristocratic life Abigail Preston had led. "The letters," Jeremiah began, stepping closer and taking a mug of coffee she offered him. He looked down into the dark liquid, suddenly seeming deeply embarrassed. "Abigail, I need to confess something to you." Clara's breath hitched. She wiped her hands on her apron, preparing for the worst. "He knows," she thought frantically. "He knows I'm a fraud." "The letters you received," Jeremiah continued, his pale blue eyes meeting hers with earnest sincerity. "The poetry, the pretty words, I didn't write them." Clara blinked, stunned. "You didn't?" Jeremiah shook his head, a wry, self-deprecating smile touching his lips. "I can read and write, sure enough, but I'm a cattleman. My hands are better suited for holding reins and swinging a laureate than dipping a quill. After my late wife, Martha, died of the fever 3 years ago, this cabin got mighty silent. Lily." He looked toward the corner where the little girl was still sleeping peacefully. "Lily stopped speaking the day we buried her mother. Hasn't said a single word since." Clara felt a sharp pang of genuine sorrow for the man. The revelation shifted something fundamental between them. "I was desperate for a mother for her," Jeremiah explained quietly. "Desperate for some warmth back in this house. So, I went to Mrs. Higgins, the schoolmarm in Bitter Creek. She's a romantic sort. She took my basic requirements and embellished them. She wrote the letters for me. I just signed my name. I wanted to tell you the truth before we stood in front of the preacher. I'm not a poet. Abigail, I'm just a man trying to keep his family alive." Clara stared at him, overwhelmed by the irony. Here was this strong, honorable man, agonizing over a minor deception, having someone help him write letters to secure a better life for his daughter. Meanwhile, she was standing in his kitchen, wearing another woman's clothes, answering to another woman's name, having hijacked an entire destiny. "Jeremiah," Clara said softly, reaching out. Without thinking, she placed her hand over his calloused knuckles. His skin was warm and rough. "You do not need to be a poet. The man standing before me is far better than any words on a page." He looked down at her hand on his, and the tension drained from his broad shoulders. He turned his hand over, gently lacing his fingers through hers. It was a quiet, profound moment of acceptance. For the next 2 days, they existed in a delicate, beautiful bubble. Clara bonded with little Lily. The child was incredibly observant, watching Clara's every move. On the afternoon of the 3rd day, Clara sat by the fire, humming an old lullaby her mother used to sing, while mending a tear in Jeremiah's winter coat. Lily slowly crept over, bringing her favorite wooden horse, and silently climbed into Clara's lap. When Jeremiah walked in, from braving the storm to feed the livestock, he froze at the sight of his daughter, resting her head against Clara's chest. Clara looked up, and for the first time since boarding the train in Philadelphia, she didn't feel like an imposter. She felt like she was exactly where she belonged. But the frontier is cruel to fragile things. On the morning of the 4th day, the storm finally broke. The wind died down, and the Wyoming sun emerged, reflecting blindingly off the endless plains of white snow. Jeremiah and Clara were at the table, discussing the trip into town to finalize the marriage with Reverend Thomas, when the heavy crunch of hooves in the snow broke the silence. Jeremiah stood up, his hand instinctively resting on the handle of the Colt revolver holstered on the wall peg. Clara hurried to the frost-rimmed window. 2 men were riding up to the cabin. One wore the brass star of a county deputy. The other was a man in a sharp, expensive wool suit, looking entirely out of place in the rugged territory. "It's Deputy Wade," Jeremiah muttered, his brow furrowing in confusion. "And a stranger." Jeremiah opened the door, stepping out onto the porch. Clara stood just inside the doorway, her heart plummeting to her stomach as she recognized the stranger. It was Mr. Harrison, a private investigator from Philadelphia. He was a ruthless man who had hounded her father for his gambling debts, the very man she had been running from. "Morning, Jeremiah," Deputy Wade called out, his breath pluming in the freezing air. "Sorry to ride out unannounced, especially with the snow this deep. What's the trouble?" "Wade," Jeremiah asked, his posture rigid. Deputy Wade shifted uncomfortably in his saddle, glancing at the investigator. "This here is Mr. Harrison. He's a Pinkerton man, out of Pennsylvania. He arrived on the train just before the storm hit. He's been waiting at the telegraph office in town." "Mr. Harrison's cold." Calculating eyes moved past Jeremiah and landed squarely on Clara. A cruel, triumphant smile spread across his face. "I have a federal warrant. Caldwell," Wade said heavily, pulling a folded piece of paper from his coat. "A warrant for the arrest of a woman traveling under the stolen identity of Abigail Preston. The charge is grand larceny, identity theft, and fleeing a lawful debt." Jeremiah went perfectly still. The silence on the porch was deafening, save for the dripping of melting snow from the cabin eaves. Slowly, he turned his head, his pale blue eyes locking onto Clara. The warmth and trust that had been building between them over the past 3 days shattered in an instant, replaced by a cold, devastating betrayal. "Abigail?" Jeremiah asked, his voice dangerously low. Clara stepped back, tears instantly blurring her vision. The stolen cameo brooch suddenly felt like a noose around her neck. "My name," she whispered, the truth finally falling from her lips like shattered glass, "is Clara." The silence that followed Clara's confession was heavier than the snowdrifts burying the Wyoming plains. On the frost-slicked porch, the warm breath from the men and horses plumed in the frigid air, the only movement in a world that had suddenly stopped spinning. Jeremiah Caldwell did not shout. He did not curse. The profound stillness that overtook him was far more terrifying. He simply stared at Clara, his pale blue eyes stripping away the pioneer woman she had pretended to be, leaving only the desperate, terrified factory girl from Philadelphia. Clara. "Mr." Harrison said, testing the name on his tongue with a poisonous sneer. The Pinkerton detective dismounted, his expensive leather boots crunching through the icy crust. He reached into his tailored wool coat and produced a heavy set of iron manacles. "Clara Montgomery, daughter of the late Jordan Montgomery. You've led us on a merry chase across 3 states. Little bird." "Jeremiah, please," Clara whispered, her voice breaking. She took a step toward him, but he instinctively shifted his weight backward, turning his shoulder to her. The physical rejection felt like a physical blow. Deputy Wade looked miserable. He tipped his hat back, running a gloved hand over his face. "Jeremiah, I'm mighty sorry to bring this to your doorstep, but Harrison here carries a writ signed by a federal judge in Pennsylvania. Old William A. Pinkerton himself put a priority on this one. Miss Montgomery's father owed a substantial sum to the Horace Remington shipping syndicate." When he passed, she emptied his remaining accounts, stole the identity and travel papers of Miss Abigail Preston of Boston, and fled via the Union Pacific. She was leaving me destitute, Clara cried out, her fear giving way to a sudden, blazing defense. Abigail Preston abandoned me in Omaha to run off with a silver miner. She left me with nothing but her discarded satchel and a mountain of unpaid hotel bills. If I had gone back to Philadelphia, Remington's men would have thrown me into the debtor's ward. Or worse, I had to survive. Survival is not an excuse for grand larceny. Miss Montgomery, Harrison snapped. Stepping onto the porch, he moved with the arrogant confidence of a man who held all the cards. The travel ticket, the bridal stipend, and the stolen identity total a theft of over $400. Added to your father's debt of $800. You belong to Mr. Remington now. Put your hands out. Clara backed up until her shoulders hit the rough logs of the cabin wall. Tears spilled hot and fast down her frozen cheeks. She looked at Jeremiah, silently begging for the man who had held her hand by the fire just hours ago, but his face was carved from stone. Then, a small, terrified whimper broke the tension. Little Lily stood in the doorway, clutching her wooden horse. Her large brown eyes darted from the shiny iron manacles in Harrison's hands to Clara's weeping face. The child didn't speak, but she ran forward, throwing her small arms around Clara's knees and burying her face in Clara's skirt. Harrison scoffed. "Move the child! Caldwell! I have a train to catch!" Jeremiah's gaze dropped to his daughter. He saw the white-knuckled grip Lily had on the fabric of Clara's stolen dress. He saw the way Clara's trembling hands protectively cradled the back of the little girl's head, even as she faced a ruthless bounty hunter. The stoic rancher closed his eyes, taking a long, slow breath of the biting air. When Jeremiah opened his eyes, the cold distance was gone, replaced by a dangerous, quiet fury. He stepped directly between Clara and the Pinkerton agent. "Put the irons away." "Harrison," Jeremiah drawled softly. Harrison bristled, his hand dropping toward the revolver at his hip. "I have a federal warrant. Caldwell, you stand in the way of a Pinkerton, and you'll find yourself in a cell beside her." "I ain't standing in the way of the law," Jeremiah said, his voice a low rumble that vibrated in the tight space. "I'm asking a businessman a question. You're here to collect a debt, $1,200 total. You said $1,250 to cover my agency's fee," Harrison corrected, narrowing his eyes. "But she doesn't have it, which means she goes back. If the debt is paid in full," Jeremiah continued, ignoring the detective and looking directly at Deputy Wade, "the warrant for fleeing a lawful debt is nullified. As for the stolen ticket, if the injured party is compensated, the local magistrate can dismiss the larceny charge. Ain't that right, Wade?" Wade shifted uncomfortably, chewing his lip. "Well, technically, yes. If restitution is made in full, I reckon Judge Miller in Bitter Creek would toss the warrant. He hates Eastern Pinkertons coming into his territory anyway." Clara's heart stopped. She stared at Jeremiah's broad back. No, he couldn't. Jeremiah turned to her. There was no romance in his eyes now, only a weary, pragmatic resolve. He gently unpried Lily's hands from Clara's skirt and picked the little girl up. "Inside," he ordered Clara quietly. Clara obeyed, stumbling back into the warmth of the cabin. Jeremiah followed, leaving the two lawmen on the porch. He walked over to the massive hearth, knelt, and used a fire iron to pry up a loose hearthstone. From the dark cavity beneath, He pulled a heavy, canvas bank sack. Clara gasped. "Jeremiah, what are you doing?" He set the sack on the pine table. It landed with a heavy, metallic clink. "That's $1,250 in gold, double eagles, and silver certificates," he said, his voice completely devoid of emotion. "It took me 3 years to save it. It was meant to buy the Higgins spread next spring, to secure water rights for the cattle, to secure Lily's future." "No," Clara sobbed, reaching out to stop him. "You cannot do this. You hate me. I lied to you. I deceived you from the moment I stepped off that train." Jeremiah paused, his hand resting on the canvas sack. He finally looked at her, his pale eyes searching her tear-streaked face. "You lied about your name," Jeremiah said softly. "You lied about where you came from, but you didn't lie to Lily. When you held her by the fire, when you sang to her, that wasn't Abigail Preston. That was Clara. I'm paying this debt. Clara, not because I forgive you, but because my daughter loves you, and I won't have her watch another mother be taken away from her." He turned on his heel, walked back out to the porch, and shoved the heavy bag into Harrison's chest. "Mr. Harrison and Deputy Wade rode out an hour later, leaving behind a legally emancipated Clara and a financially ruined Jeremiah. The Pinkerton man had painstakingly counted every coin, drafted a legally binding receipt of restitution, and relinquished the federal warrant into the cabin's blazing fire. As the sound of the horses faded into the howling wind, a suffocating silence descended upon the Caldwell ranch. The domestic bubble they had shared during the blizzard was completely shattered. Jeremiah went out to the barn and did not return until well after nightfall. Clara mechanically went through the motions of the day, cooking stew, mending clothes, and putting Lily to bed. But she felt like a ghost, haunting a home she had no right to inhabit. When Jeremiah finally came inside, he was covered in snow and smelling of horses and frost. He ate his dinner in total silence, his eyes fixed on the grain of the wooden table. "Jeremiah," Clara finally whispered, unable to bear the heavy quiet any longer. "I will work. I will take in washing in Bitter Creek. I will help you run the cattle. I will pay you back every single cent of that money." He set his spoon down, exhaustion etched deeply into the lines of his face. "It's not about the money, Clara. Water rights can be negotiated. A ranch can be rebuilt. It's about the truth. Out here, a man's word is all that keeps him alive. You built a house on a foundation of lies. I don't know how to look at you and see anything else." The words cut deeper than the Wyoming cold. Clara nodded slowly, the last flicker of hope dying in her chest. She stood up, clearing the plates. "You are right," she said, her voice shaking but resolute. "I am a fraud, and you are a good, honorable man. You bought my freedom today, Jeremiah, and I owe you my life. But I will not burden you with my presence any longer. As soon as the pass is clear for the stagecoach tomorrow, I will leave for town." Jeremiah didn't argue. He didn't ask her to stay. He just stared into the dying embers of the fire. The next morning dawned bright and bitterly clear. Clara packed the few meager belongings she had into a rough burlap sack. She refused to take the stolen leather satchel. She dressed in her thin eastern coat, pinning her own mother's simple wooden comb into her hair, discarding Abigail Preston's fancy cameo on the dresser. Jeremiah had hitched the buckboard. He stood by the horses, his breath pluming, waiting to drive her into Bitter Creek. Clara knelt by the porch steps to say goodbye to Lily. The little girl was clutching her wooden horse, her bottom lip trembling. "Be a good girl for your father." "Lily," Clara whispered, fighting back a sob as she hugged the small child tight. "You have a brave, wonderful papa. Don't you ever forget that." Clara stood, wiping her eyes, and turned towards the wagon. "Mama." The word was so soft, so fragile, it was almost swallowed by the wind. Clara froze. Jeremiah, standing by the horses, whipped his head around, his eyes wide with shock. Lily dropped her wooden horse in the snow. She took a step toward Clara, tears spilling down her plump cheeks. "Mama, please don't go." It was the first time the child had spoken in 3 years. Jeremiah dropped the reins. He stared at his daughter, his chest heaving, listening to the impossible sound of her voice. Then he looked at Clara. He saw her standing in the snow, stripped of her fancy lies, stripped of Abigail's fine clothes, wearing nothing but her own fragile courage and a love for a child that wasn't hers by blood, but was hers by choice. Suddenly, the letters. Mrs. Higgins had written the poetry Jeremiah had claimed he didn't possess made perfect sense. "I am a man who wants a partner to share the quiet beauty of the frontier. I want a warmth back in this house." The name on the contract didn't matter. The money didn't matter. The woman he had been waiting for in the snowstorm was standing right in front of him. Jeremiah closed the distance between them in 3 massive strides. He didn't drawl softly this time. He moved with sudden, desperate urgency. He wrapped his heavy arms around Clara, pulling her flush against his canvas duster, burying his face in her hair. "Don't go," Jeremiah choked out, his rough voice breaking with emotion. "Please, Clara, but don't go." Clara buried her face in his chest, her hands gripping his coat as if he were the only solid thing in the world. "I have nothing left to give you," she cried. "I am just Clara." Jeremiah pulled back, cupping her cold face in his large, calloused hands. His pale blue eyes were fierce with a new, unshakable certainty. "Just Clara," he repeated, a slow, genuine smile breaking across his weathered face for the very first time. "I reckon that's exactly the woman I've been waiting out here for." He bent down and scooped Lily up with one arm, pulling Clara in close with the other. The 3 of them stood together as the harsh Wyoming wind whipped around them. Perfectly warm, perfectly safe, and finally, perfectly true. The stagecoach left Bitter Creek that afternoon empty. But the following Sunday, Reverend Thomas stood at the altar of the small timber church, marrying a stoic rancher, not to a Boston heiress named Abigail, but to a fierce, brave baker's daughter named Clara. And as they kissed, the loudest sound in the church was the joyous laughter of a little girl who had finally found her voice. What an incredible journey for Clara and Jeremiah, from a stolen identity in a bitter Wyoming blizzard to finding a true, honest love. Their story proves that sometimes the greatest treasures are found when we strip away the lies. If this Wild West romance captured your heart, please hit that like button, share this video with your fellow drama lovers, and subscribe to our channel for more unforgettable frontier tales.